The Misfits.
Alright everybody, welcome back. I am actually in the studio for once. It's semi-cooled off enough for me to be up here. We did lose a light that was hanging when I walked in, but we're making it work. And so we are back for another Misfits episode, and we are going today to do one that Joe and I tried to record like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the heat kept making it so that none of my technology would work. So we're going to try and do it again, this time in studio, and this time with a fan going, because it's still pretty hot up here, but hopefully you can't even hear it. So today what we are doing, this is not the typical Joe is on Misfits type of episode, because Joe is here today more from the Thoughts from the Bearded Geek side of things, because we are going to be talking a couple of book/musical/movie characters and looking at the representations of them, specifically two specific styles of the representations of them in these well-known, well-loved media things, and looking at them in relation to what we have going on today and the reaction both to pastors that are trying to do this as well as pastors that are saying that we should not be doing these things, even though they also say they love these films. So, specifically, if you haven't figured out who we're talking about, we are looking at two different characters. Actually, I guess technically it's three different characters written by the same guy over two different novels that have been made into musicals and movies. So, we're looking at Victor Hugo's representations of priests and bishops and members of the church and all of that kind of stuff. So we're looking at the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and we are looking at Les Mis. So to start with, we want to make sure that we understand who we're talking about a little bit here. So Joe, I'm assuming, I don't know, have you actually ever read the novels, or are you just familiar with the movies and the musicals?
I've read the novels too.
Okay, good. So you actually are going to be able to confirm a lot of this stuff, because I've only slightly looked at them. I've never actually read them all the way through or anything like that. So for the most part, people that are familiar with the musicals, the bishop in Les Mis is pretty accurate to the novel, correct? Yeah. For those that have read Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I've read much more of than I've read Les Mis, the Archbishop doesn't actually even exist within Les Mis, or not within Les Mis, within Hunchback of Notre Dame. The Archbishop actually is Frollo within the novels. So, just to make sure that we're clear on that, we're going to be talking more about it from a movie perspective and the novel's perspective, because that's what we actually want to get into. But I think it is important for us to first look at why these two stuck out to me, at least, and Joe agreed to come on. So I don't know how much they stuck out to him. We'll find out. But the Victor Hugo in general grew up Catholic, which is not abnormal because this is 18th or 19th century France. Grew up Catholic, but as the Enlightenment period and things started to become more entwined with what he was believing, he rejected the faith pretty much completely. I believe he classified himself as a deist, but he was no longer a part of the Catholic tradition, anything like that. However, he included a lot of Catholic themes within his writings, which is part of the reason why we want to make sure we also address this, is that this is written by somebody that was no longer a part of the church. And so the writings that he had have been changed in these movies a lot of times due to the fact that it presented a lot of anti-Catholic bias. Anybody that has listened to anything Joe and I have ever done knows that we are very much outspoken against the anti-Catholic bias within the church, and that it needs to stop and all that. So that's part of the reason why we're looking at this from the perspective of the movies, not necessarily the novels. But it's something that's worth noting as we move forward, that these are written by somebody that is no longer at all dealing with the church outside of just it's part of the culture that he's living in. Would that be accurate, Joe?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. So now that that's out of the way, we're going to look at these two guys. So we've got Frollo, who is technically the archdeacon in the novel, but is now just some kind of religious judge living in France within Hunchback. You also are presented with the archdeacon, who is actually the one that oversees everything going on at Notre Dame. Those are the two characters we've got going on within Hunchback of Notre Dame that we're going to look at. Within Les Mis, we are going to be focused on the bishop, which is probably going to be the easiest one because, like we said, it didn't change from movie or from book to musical to movie. So let's actually just start there and look at that one first. So, Joe, I'll let you, since you've actually read it and are much more of our media or our movie and media guy anyway. Les Mis is set during I can never even remember which revolution are we at within France when this is going on. I can't
That's
remember.
a good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but the bishop is somebody that is portrayed as someone who is a transformative saint in a lot of regards. The moral compass is very high, and is a character that is supposed to represent radical grace. So when when Jean Valjean steals from him, the bishop doesn't just forgive him, but gives him more and tells him to use it to become a new man. This is supposed to be a moment where a spiritual pivot happens for Jean Valjean, and it sets the tone for what would ultimately become a story of redemption.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason I was asking was because I couldn't remember. But yeah, for those that have never seen any of this or heard any of it or read any of it, depending on which medium you're going to take this one in, because it's in all different forms at this point. We're introduced to the main character of this whole thing as he's about to be released from a slave prison, basically, within France. He's being told repeatedly within this prison that he's nothing but a violent criminal, that he's never going to amount to anything, and that they're always going to be watching all this stuff. He ends up running into this bishop. This bishop brings him in, clothes him, feeds him. In the middle of the night, Jean Valjean goes and steals pretty much everything he can from the bishop's home to try to sell to make some money so that he can get started, all this stuff. He gets caught. The police bring him in, and the priest very clearly says, and Jean Valjean says that it was given to him as a gift. He didn't steal anything. When they confront the bishop on this, the bishop confirms Jean Valjean's story, and not only confirms the story, but gives him more stuff on top of it.
Real quick, let me jump into the previous question. So, it's set during the June Revolution, or the June Rebellion of 1832. So a lot of folks will put it at that they think it takes place in the French Revolution, which was 1789 to 1799. But the June Rebellion, for those that don't know, was a smaller scale failed insurrection in Paris by people who were angry about poverty, inequality, and the monarchy's return to power. So this is the actual historical event that is depicted throughout everything that's going on in the backdrop of Les Mis, and Victor Hugo wanted to use the lesser known uprising
Yeah.
as a backdrop because he thought it better displayed the deeper themes that we're going to get into of injustice and redemption and grace rather than just chronicling a revolution.
Yeah, and that's what it's a very important thing that it's not just we're giving the history behind it. It all matters. It all matters immensely for what we're about to discuss as on a grander scale. I mean, largely part of it, and this is where we'll make the few French listeners we had, Matt. It's hard to remember also because there's been so many rebellions and revolutions throughout French history, but the backdrop of a people that is being oppressed by a government and being fed up and ready to fight back is the main backdrop. That's why we start, the prison we start off in is the fact that he is being used as free labor by a government. And he says his crime is just that he stole a loaf of bread to feed his sister's kid or something like that, right? Something like that. And because of that, he's now spent multiple years in slavery just because he was trying to feed his nephew or niece or whoever it was. And then we counter that with immediately the first person that he meets outside of this is somebody who freely gives everything he has to him. Doesn't see him as anything but realistically doesn't see him as anything other than an image bearer that is in need. And that is how he treats him. And, we'll get into it in a little bit as well. He even prays over him in a blessing format that he become the person that he, the bishop, and that who he said that God sees him as. And it sets off the whole journey and the musical and everything else that we get through for the rest of the play. But it's a very important, seemingly small thing, but in the backdrop of everything, it's very telling of where the bishop's priorities actually lied and where his heart was at and where he felt God's heart was at as well. And part of the reason I started with Victor Hugo's background is it's interesting that in the midst of all of the crisis and stuff that was going on when Victor Hugo was alive and as well as the period that he's writing this out of, that somebody that left the Catholic Church is able to communicate so effectively what the actual mission of the church and what the gospel message should actually be is.
So one of the things that we're going to get into when we talk about this is that religious figures tend to be a catch-all for whatever plot, feeling, character attribute is that you're trying to convey or that the story needs. They tend to be a blank slate for a lot of writers. This is a huge reason why, and we're not going to necessarily get into this realm of religious figure portrayal, but there's a reason why you see a lot of use of the religious figure in horror, in the horror genre, because they are utilized to convey oftentimes either a struggling with the faith or a catalyst to depict good overcoming evil, those kinds of things. And I do think it's interesting whenever you hear a story of somebody who walked away from an institution but then ended up in a situation where by every single standard and measurement, the way that they portray or the way that they conceive or the way that they describe what the true representation should look like of a follower of Christ, of a holy man, of that sort of figure is more spot on than some of the other folks that are a bit more institutionalized. You know what I mean? Like, I just think it's an interesting thing when you look at Victor Hugo's background
Yeah.
to see that from his mind you get this character. Now, there are a lot of people who have the theory that the reason why you get this is because this is him being trying to be idealistic and saying this is what religious figures should be and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm going to represent um what this is. Now, granted, that's conjecture. We don't have any kind of specific statement that says this is it. It's more of putting the puzzle pieces together and then from that point positing a theory on why people think that this character was created.
Right. And even if that was the case, we can even say that that's okay if that is the case, that was the intent, because the reality is that we are able to say that even if this was just supposed to be an idealistic idea, it's still grounded in something. The idea is still grounded in something, and what it's grounded in is really what, it's grounded in a Matthew 25, Matthew 5 type of mindset, is what that idea is grounded in. This, I'm willing to give everything up regardless of what is asked of me. I'm willing to give more of what is asked of me up. I'm willing to do all this stuff, even in a time of turmoil and all this stuff, even to somebody that's a violent criminal, all this kind of stuff up. Where even if it was Hugo's intent that this is just an idealized thing, I think that would still be okay because of the fact that, at least for the purpose of our discussion, we know where the idea is actually centered at.
I would argue that idealism, at least at some level, comes with the job description.
Yeah.
Um, so before, like, even
Both
beyond
job
just
descriptions,
saying
both
it's
a writer,
okay.
let's say both job descriptions,
Yeah,
writer and pastor, it's both job descriptions.
yeah. And I would say even beyond just pastor, I would say as a Christian,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think in order for us to actually show grace, we need to have some measure of idealism somewhere inside of us. And so I wouldn't even just say that it's okay. I would say that it's good because I think hope is one of those things that takes many forms and is oftentimes presents itself in somebody else's coat.
Mm-hmm.
So like it can show as something else, but when you dig in, why is that something else even present in the conversation where it doesn't necessarily make sense? Well, maybe if I write it, this is me saying that somewhere out there
Yeah.
this exists.
Yeah.
If it can come out of my mind, maybe somebody else has adopted this way of life, especially when you're talking about pushing back against things like tyranny and social injustice and different things like that, like the topics that would be very present at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also, and we're going to come back to that later on, but I think that it also is a good segue into pointing out the difference between the character of Hugo's image of the archdeacon in Hunchback compared to what we're going to actually get into as well, because I think in Les Mis we've got this bishop who's actually gospel driven. we would use the term Christocentric, kingdom-minded, all these sort of things of where it's very much of I am going to do what the Sermon on the Mount has called me to. It literally of, if somebody asks you for your coat, you give them more. That's literally the image that is given, and that's what we see in Les Mis. That's very much a polar opposite of what he wrote for Hunchback. So to give people a timeline, Hunchback was published 1831. Les Mis was published 1862. So Les Mis was the one of the later things he wrote. Maybe was it the last thing he wrote? Maybe, I'm not even sure. But it was much later on. Early on in his writing career with Hunchback is where we get a different picture. So in the movies, we know Frollo only as the judge and things like that. But in the book, it's a little bit different because he not only is the judge, he also is actually the archbishop. He's a former orphan. He raises basically himself and his brother, and they do the church. His brother goes off to law school. He adopts Quasimodo actually out of the goodness of his heart because it was a baby that was just left at the steps. All these other things. And it wasn't until Esmeralda comes along and he is inflamed by, we'll do the whole Hellfire song, that this other side of him comes out. And so he's out to try to get her. He wants her arrested. He's trying to do all these different stuff. He abandons Quasimodo after Quasimodo is accused of a crime that Frollo commits. All these different things. And so the picture that Hugo actually gives us in the novel of Hunchback of Notre Dame is one that is a religious figure that is abusive, both spiritually, physically, sexually, all of the things. He's abusive. So you have in his early writings, you have the picture of a priest that is just nothing but abusive and evil. And then his later writings, you have a picture of a bishop who is the actual representation of Jesus on earth. And it's just interesting the contrast that you've got between the two, which is, I don't know if that's actually where the idealism argument comes from or not, but it's just an interesting thing to look at, is that, again, we're seeing somebody depicting something that we know is actually happening within the church, but somebody outside the church that has left the church that is actually going to depict it. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but just something else that I found interesting. Now, what we're actually going to get into, though, is we're going to look at more so of the character of the archbishop that we have from the Disney version of Victor Hugo's novel that was released back in the 90s, where we have the archbishop who runs Notre Dame, and we open up with the story of the fact that a group of gypsies were being hunted by Frollo and his men. He ends up killing Quasimodo's mother, somewhat accidentally, quote unquote. They're on the steps of Notre Dame, finds the baby, sees it's misshapen and deformed, and wants to kill it. And right before he kills it, the archbishop comes out, yells stop, and gives this grand speech about how Frollo. I just went Tolkien for a second. Frollo has blood on his hands, that he should be convicted of this blood on his hands, especially because it happened on the steps of Notre Dame, and that his penance should be that he has to now raise the child. Now, we're dealing with again, this is not what we have going on within the novel, but it's one that is, again, a little bit different because we also then see him throughout the film later on defending the sanctity of the building and the need for it to be a sanctuary that is free from the tyranny from outside for whoever enters and declares it.
One of the things that I find interesting when you juxtapose these two characters is one seems to be based in realism, and one seems to be based in idealism. We
Yeah.
talked about the idealism, but the realism portion of it sees a character with a downward decline in morality, with a downward decline in perspective and position and all of that. Especially in the books. Especially in the
Yeah.
book, it is there's more of a flushed out character arc where we see more of a progressive decline in ethic and character, whereas from the book or from the movie, it is more of a straightforward religious hypocrite tyrant sort of figure. I think it's interesting that part of what makes both of these works timeless but uncomfortable
Hmm.
is that they hit on basic human aspects that, for better and for worse, ring true beyond just the time period
Yeah.
that it's depicting, and part of that is in the character portrayal. So in Notre Dame, um, there is, especially in the Disney version, a specific stylization of the Romani people,
Yeah.
utilizing words that um, are very, very normalized, but to some are wildly disrespectful. Um, and in some respects, it flies under the radar because it's not straightforward racism in the standard sense that we see. But to some folks, even the word that you used would be considered racist. Um, and I think it's interesting when you see this story, just how multifaceted
Mm-hmm.
these subjects are, and how in different cultures we don't even it doesn't resonate as much because it's not the flavor that we're most used to. There are certain things that for guys like us, they're straight down the middle. You know, they are, we see it, we know it, we're familiar with it, we understand that it exists. And credit to my wife, there are aspects of this that I would have no idea about, but one of her good friends is Romani. And so I am very well aware of like the intricacies of how Disney really drops the ball in a really big way, but it's colorful and it's got songs and it's kid oriented and it comes out in the West where most people don't even think twice about that. Because again, it's not what we've had to deal with. And you see a character like the religious, like you, well, rather you see the system that's showcased
Hmm.
as the religious system, the authoritarian system. In some ways, it very comfortably slots into the category of a Disney villain because there's a not zero group of people who don't know what it means to be at the subjugation
Yeah.
of authority structures. And so we talk about this in a certain way, or it flies under the radar in a certain way, because if you don't understand how real this is, then it either sits at the level of a caricature, or it sits at the level of an over-embellished kid's story.
Right.
And part of why we even bring these stories up is to ask the sometimes painful but always necessary question of, in these moments in history, in these situations where there is social unrest, or there's power struggles, or there's authoritarian issues, or whatever the case may be, even if it's not during a rebellion, a revolution, a war, if it's just any other week,
Mm-hmm.
what do we do with the injustice? What do we do as people of God to be able to do what we need to do where we are? It's the low-hanging fruit to make this about pastors. It's a lot deeper when you start to talk about what is, at a very applicable level, the role of the follower of Christ
Right.
in the midst of injustice and turmoil and power struggles and all of the things that, if you go back in history, different time, different place, different context, so on and so forth, and all of the things. But even in shades, even in hints, even in hues, there is continuity throughout history, that when you place somebody in power over other people, that corruption is going to take place.
Yes.
On some level, in some way. And so, even though over years and over time and over millennia, the roles, or the culture, or the time period, or the place, or whatever the case may be, have looked different, and we need to be aware of antiquity. We need to be aware of the context of these different stories, because anytime you're talking about antiquity, part of it has to sit at the level of antiquity and stay in the past. But other points need to be pulled forward into the present, because there's continuity, because there is a timeless aspect to the teachings and way of life that we are called to. And so, when you look at something like this, I would argue and advocate to ask yourself some questions. Why is this character doing this?
Mm-hmm.
What are the character attributes of this person? You know, we do on the, for some of you that are also on the other socials, for the Misfits and for KFM and for Buddy Walk and for the different spots, you know that I do this thing called Pastor Reacts.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started doing this thing where I'm talking about the philosophy of different IPs, different shows, different movies, different characters, different things like that. And when looking at something like this, let's for a second take it out of the realm of, oh, that's just a musical. Oh, that's just a Disney movie. And put it into the context of asking questions of these characters, asking questions of the person creating these characters, asking questions of the situation and the circumstance and all of those kinds of things. Because I don't think it's helpful for us to sit on a perch and say, oh, if you were alive during this time, you would have been this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it became in vogue a handful of months ago to say if you were alive during Nazi-occupied Germany, you would have been this. Not helpful. I call out every single solitary Christian who posted that garbage and nonsense because you're sitting in condemnation. You are sitting in judgment. That's not on you. That's not on you to judge a person's heart and to make sweeping statements and to put people in categories and all of those kinds of things. That is not on you. What you need to be doing is examining your own self and then figuring out what do I need to be displaying to the world around me. Stop trying to fix other people because that's not your job. That's not in the job description.
Right.
But again, though, to get to the point of where we're actually at, there's a lot of power in being able to look honestly at the lens of antiquity or look honestly at a character model, because the reality is that for both of these people, there are plenty of examples that could be drawn of real life flesh and blood people who either have or currently do walk this earth that fit the bill, all in the name of the I'll put it, the Jesus that they serve.
Yeah, and that's where, there's a bunch of things that we're going to go into from everything you just said. But I think the first thing to look at is this idea of the timelessness of it and the fact that it's supposed to make us look inward is a good place to start. Because, the reality is, and this is what we said before with the whole idea of idealism versus realism and everything else. The ideals that are presented, the timeless truth that's presented is the gospel. That is what is presented here. Is that power is always going to corrupt and is always going to bring about destruction. It just is. That is what is going to happen. And that's why all of Jesus's teachings are about the removal of power from ourselves. It's about getting rid of the power and laying it down willingly. It's about sacrifice. It is about the removal of power and the embracing of submission. That is what the gospel is about all the way through. That's why we always are talking about the fact that the gospel is incarnational, because that we obviously have to do that spiritually, which is what everybody wants to talk about. But if we do it spiritually and don't do it physically, we haven't even done it spiritually. Which is that's what Frollo represents, right? He's the righteous man that walks around and condemns sin and talks about all the spiritual stuff and the supernatural stuff, but has never once actually, that's what the lyrics of the opening song of the Disney version of Hunchback is. It's for the first time, or what does it say? Where'd it go? And for one time in his life of power and control, Frollo felt a twinge of fear for his immortal soul. Like, he's never done the work. He's never looked inward. He just knows what it's supposed to look like. And so it's the reason why we started with the idea of pastors, because that's what these characters are. And we're going to get into also the fact that there is a pastoral aspect to what we should be seeing in this world right now as well. But this starts with all believers anyway. Because we're back to, again, where if it's not happening inward, it doesn't matter what you're doing outward. Because until you remove the power, you are going to hurt someone. May not be intentionally, but until you do the work, you're going to end up hurting somebody, because it's just going to happen. There's no way around it. Now, the other part where we get into, and again, there's a reason also why we chose these two from the musicals in general, is that they're lyrics that were written for them. I don't even know if, obviously, Hugo wasn't the one that wrote it for Hunchback, because this character didn't exist in his book. But in Les Mis, I don't know if it's actually his words or not, but there's an interesting thing and theme in both musicals, and the wording of how these men go about the conviction, I guess would be the way to say it, of the two men they're dealing with. In Les Mis, it's much more of a loving grace filled. In Hunchback, it's very much more of rebuke than it is anything else. But both of them call on the witness of the martyrs as what is supposed to help keep these other men accountable. And in Les Mis, he very clearly says it's by the witness of the martyrs and their blood that he is part of what it is that he is. It's the authority that he's calling on to be able to bless this man. It is because this is what the church is about.
Mm-hmm.
In Hunchback, it's about the fact that no matter how much Frollo tries to hide his insecurities and his fears and his hatred of others, it can't be hidden from the eyes of Notre Dame, which the eyes of Notre Dame are the statues of the saints, the martyrs. This is part of why we get into, besides the fact that it just is the basic fundamental teachings of Jesus that we're really getting at here. This is also part of where we are able to, this is why we're saying this is about everybody. This is not just about pastors or priests or bishops, is that even when in these films, it's the witness of the church as a whole that they call on to start, at least attempt to start self-reflection in the two men that they're dealing with. That can't be ignored. That's a big thing. That's a big thing. It's the witness of the church that drives that allows the person to, I mean, this is not obviously what Hugo's intent was by any of this, but this is what in a real world scenario we would know it would be happening, is that it is that witness that will allow the person to actually let the Spirit work and convict. That doesn't happen if the witness of the church is doing the very thing that is being, that they're supposed to be convicted about. Does that make sense? I don't know if I said that right. I think it made sense. It made sense in my head. Now, the other thing that is interesting, this is where we're getting into more of where Joe's talking about as far as the fact that this is also timeless in terms of the fact that people are trying to make connections back in history as far as, well, if you support this, then that means you would have supported this and all that. I will say, while it's 100% true, their history repeats itself. And there are things going on now that people are supporting of that were supported by people back then. But this is the conversation that we got into when we also looked at the whole Barabbas and who killed Jesus debates and everything else that we've done in the past. Is that we like to think that because we are educated now in a subject, that means we were always educated in that subject, and so we always would have made the same decision. We have the benefit of knowing the outcome from history that other people may not have. And so you can't be, this is what Joe was saying, you can make the correct correlation that, hey, similar things are happening here. But to say that you, as somebody that sees the correlation now, would have seen it 100 years ago, is putting yourself on a pretty high horse. And to say that the people around you that don't see it yet are the same people that wouldn't have seen it 100 years ago is again, you are not recognizing the very things that we're talking about here, that the bishops and the priests are recognizing, is that each person is an individual here. These are all image bearers. They are not your political project or political enemy or anything else. We are dealing with people that are in times and situations that affect our perception on things.
And I think we live in a time where we now have instant access to respond.
Right.
And for those of us that create content, there is an expectation that we instantaneously respond. And whether it's a social media post or a podcast or a YouTube video or whatever, you have to ask yourself the question, are you just adding to the noise?
Yeah.
Are you just taking what you're seeing and building something around it for it to be the vehicle for your reaction to it? And how helpful is it for you to react to it? And to say, you people,
Mm-hmm.
like, categories are dangerous. I don't care. Like, I've always fought this fight. Andrew and I have gone 12 rounds with the ref over this fight. Categories are dangerous. They're not good. They're easy. They're very um they're very modern, and thus it's very normative, and it's very easy in a social media culture to say, oh, I'm shorthanding, I'm addressing a specific group of people. People know what I mean when I say this. Does everybody, though? How are you representing Jesus in that moment?
Right.
Those are honest questions that you have to ask yourself. Not you don't have to answer to me. That's not the point. But the point is, what are you doing to represent Jesus to the outside world? And so the wrong lesson from stuff like this is to say, oh, this is an example of tyranny. We have modern tyranny. People supported tyranny back then. People support tyranny now. Those people are the same.
Right.
Wrong. Different time, different place, different circumstance, sometimes different country.
Mm-hmm.
Like all kinds of things.
Well, and
And there's nothing wrong with um acknowledging the historical pattern and the historical lineage of something. That's fine. One of the most aggravating but enlightening books that I've read this year was Jesus and John Wayne,
mm-hmm.
because I see a lot of emotional takes to nationalism. And that's why I've backed back out of the conversation. I got into the conversation for a minute, but literally, I could not point to a single person who wasn't emotionally reacting on some level to nationalism. And so I backed out of the conversation. People that are dressing it up in history, but emotionally reacting nonetheless. In reading Jesus and John Wayne, it was written by a historian from a historical point of view.
Yeah.
These are the facts. This is how it went down. These are the people involved. Do you question whether or not, the writer is pro or anti or whatever? No, not for a hot second are you going to have any question. But the one thing that did strike me is what you don't have any idea about is whether or not the author is a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing you have no idea about is what their story is, because it's not about their story. It's about the story of America's wrestling with conservative politics and religion.
Yeah.
And it remained about that. It stepped to the plate to do that, and it remained that. And I use that as an example because for my money, and I don't go around making it a regular habit to read a whole bunch of stuff on nationalism, so there very well could be another book out there that anybody who's well versed should be like, no, it's this one. For my money, it is pound for pound the most straightforward book on
Yeah.
on nationalism.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because I'm looking the awkward elephant in the room dead in the eye and acknowledging the awkward elephant in the room, that somebody somewhere somehow read the headline of this episode, read what we were talking about, and thought we were going to go on a 20-minute tirade about the juxtaposition of Frollo and Trump. That's not what this is.
No.
And
And I was going to say, the irony, first of all, of what you were just talking about Dr. Dumais, is that when the book started picking up the virability of it, that was largely where a lot of the anger towards it came from, was that it was a history book and not a gospel book.
yeah.
But the reality is, the history she's looking at is one of where it's the history exists because of the fact that the gospel wasn't showing up in gospel places in the first place.
Yeah.
And you and I have had this discussion as well, where it's a little frustrating for me being in the position I am, where we were talking about nationalism before it technically had a name. It was being called all sorts of other different stuff back in 2015, all that kind of stuff. And we have been in many ways told that we were creating something, right? We were creating this new boogeyman and everything else, that it didn't exist and all stuff. And then suddenly, in the past 6 to 10, 12 months, now that people actually see it on display and acknowledge it exists, now we're back to where you're talking about the content creator thing of, well, we've got to react to it now. But it's being reacted to in a way that is political or emotional and not dealing with the theology behind it. The theology is where we got to start, because it's a gospel issue. This is a gospel issue. When gospel and power mix, we get Frollo. When the gospel is at the heart and power is removed, we get the bishop and we get the archdeacon. It's a theological choice that has to start here, and that we've got to do the work here. And when we just react to it, we ignore here and we just react. And when we just react, we are now trying to claim something to be the gospel, removed from power that is in reality a gospel that is centered on, again, it's power with me at the helm. It's not Christocentric. It's not focused on other people. It's focused on dealing with something that makes me uncomfortable. It's about getting me back to comfortable, when the gospel is about making ourselves uncomfortable. Now, there is a little bit of so what do we do with this? And this is part of why we want to do all that first, because there is a little bit of where do we go from here in today's world. And this is not, and this, we said this back last year around this time when we did our Project 2025 thing. Trump really does not matter in any of this.
No.
It doesn't, because he's just talking. That's not my concern. My concern is with the church and with people that are supposed to be the ones that are able to call upon the witness to convict people, and not call upon their witness to support something that is harming other people. There are themes within both novels that we talked about already, and within both movies that we've talked about already. And one of them is grace, specifically. But it's not the grace that we normally talk about in theological circles. Because normally when we talk about grace, we just talk about grace in terms of God's grace for us, right? There's a different level of grace that we see being shown in these kind of films, in movies and books. The grace of the bishop to not only not count this guy's sin against him, but to give him more than what is asked, even though this guy is a criminal and everything like that, when asked by law enforcement, is this guy a criminal? Did he steal from you? His answer is, of course not. I gave this to him.
Right.
That's something that just this week I have seen Christians tell me to make those kind of statements would be sinning. Because we are supposed to be pro law enforcement. And so if we lie to law enforcement, then God now counts us as a sinner. The opening song in Hunchback, when you've got the death of this woman, it's very interesting that when the archdeacon addresses her, to see the innocent blood that was spilled. Now, according to the law at the time, this is she's doing illegal things and all this other stuff. But according to the archdeacon, it is innocent blood that was spilled. And again, this is something that we're seeing right now where if you don't have the right legal document, we are being told that we are not supposed to be supportive of these people because they are not innocent. They are illegal. And so that affects the way we are supposed to treat them. This is where the reason why we said that pastors especially, this applies to all Christians, like we've said multiple times, that pastors especially, we have got to decide how we as the shepherds of a congregation are actually going to lead the congregation. Because you cannot be flag waving July 4th, everything, and we are going to be law abiding citizens during these times. That's part of what is also a resounding truth, is that at some point within just about every culture's history, the church has had to decide, are we going to be the law abiding citizens or are we going to be the church? This isn't the first time it's happened in the U.S. This has happened multiple times throughout U.S. history. The abolitionists had to decide this. The Underground Railroad workers had to decide this. We had to decide this back during World War II with the Japanese internment camps. We have to make these kind of decisions throughout history, but we are back at a point where we have to make the decision of who is it that we are representing. Are we going to be just the law-abiding citizens, or are we going to actually present grace in a way that is gospel-driven, to where we see people as image bearers first, and that we are going to do what Christ has called us to, regardless of what it's labeled as outside of that? And again, that doesn't just apply to the pastors, though, because every one of us has to make that decision. It's got to start inward. We're back to, again, it's got to start inward. It's got to start with, what do I actually believe about the gospel and its effects in the world? What do I actually believe about my role in all of this? And make the decision.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Joe, what all do you have going on with Pastor Reacts and with Bearded Geek and everything? You got anything coming up?
I am going to be starting back up going live on Tuesdays, starting this upcoming Tuesday. That's coming back, and then I have I just did a philosophy of Star Wars episode talking about the politics of Star Wars and all of that, and I'm getting ready to release an episode on Golden Age Superman and all of that as well.
Nice. Yeah, philosophy of Star Wars is a whole nother thing we could get into, because there's a lot of this kind of stuff in there as well. So anyway, go check all of that. You can find all of it at the KFM website, kfmbroadcasting.com. If you go to Joe's profile, I think you can get all of his shows, or you can just go through the show list and look for all of those. Meanwhile, Misfit-wise, the new website is up. It's mostly running. There's a few things that I found that apparently the link already got broke, so we're fixing it. when we have time. We're doing a lot more of the outdoor stuff for the summer. So if you've been very confused as to what is going on with the Misfits feed at the moment, we at least in Ohio, did the heat wave hit you over there in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Midwest East Coast got hit with a massive heat wave, for those that didn't know. And my studio is upstairs in an unair conditioned attic. So there was not a chance until today of me getting in here. And even now, I'm thinking it may have still been a little too soon to be in here. And so we've been having some issues being able to record because of that. We tried to record off location a couple of times, and we've had some technical difficulties there. So we're trying to slowly get back for the summer. We just may be a little inconsistent during the summer. But we also this summer have been able to finally get going with all the outdoor stuff. And so we've been spending a lot more time trying to get those things up and running. So if you have not, you should go follow the Misfits Outdoors YouTube channel. In addition to the Misfits channel, you can also find Thoughts from a Bearded Geek on YouTube over there as well. Go follow that. If you are on TikTok, come follow the Misfits Outdoors on TikTok as well. That channel is growing pretty rapidly. And so the more we can grow that, the better off we are. We are doing a lot of live streams from there, as well as the Twitch account, which Buddy Walk has a Twitch now as well. I don't think you've been on since you started that. So if you're on Twitch, go check out Buddy Walk Pod. He's also got a TikTok up and running where he's covering a lot of mental health topics. So it's at Buddy Walk Pod there on TikTok as well. So you can find all of that. And I think that's about it. So we'll leave it at that. Go watch some movies. Go read some Victor Hugo novels. And we will see you all whenever I get back in here into the hot studio.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/ministrymisfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/ministrymisfits.